Join the club, mate. Join the club.
Steady on, steady on, steady on. Now I've gone live. We've definitely got to steady on. We're just talking about vomiting bugs. So there we go. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. Speaking of vomiting, evening, Richard. No. Richard has very kindly, even though I suggested we were going to rip into him, it's still, or foolishly, kindly or foolishly, is joining us. Where shall we start this evening? Let's just get this one out of the way. Rumors of the new DJI Mavic Mini 3 HSD, HS2, whatever. What do we think of that?
It's going to happen. The irony is, my Autel video finally went live this week.
Yes.
And the irony is, okay, they are on the back foot in the sense of they are no longer the dominant product in every segment for them. DJI are traditionally the best product in all of the segments. And for a few months, they've not had the king position. So, it's not really much of anything to say there's going to be a Mavic Mini 3. The leaks look fairly good. It looks like it hit every branch on the way down.
I was just going to say, do we believe because it's horrible looking, or because it's believed that is a crashed test as well?
Well, both, in fact, because it's a design I'm shocked come out of DJI. I look at it and think, really? But it does look
horrible, doesn't it?
It does look crashed. It's going to happen. I think the biggest question would be, what's the price? It's not the product. Okay, we know what can be done in a drone of that size because Autel have done it. Fitting object avoidance sensors isn't difficult. Someone's already done this. There's some nice little clever stuff which I noticed on it, like the object sensors for the rear right at the front, so it's overlooking the top of the craft and behind it. So that's actually quite clever if you think about it, because they're getting two sets of sensing out of one set of cameras. The question is price. It's not performance. Autel have already put bigger sensors in small drones. They've already added all of the stuff DJI are going to add. It's not about the specs. This is going to be now about price. And if they can, undercut them. The big issue I did have with the Autel is £800 for the Nano. And it's a lot of money for a very, very small drone. If DJI come in at $650, which we know they can, it's going to be game over.
And it feels like it is that sort of time. I'm butting in every time. It feels like that is the time when DJI is going to do the undercut, because everyone knows how good the Autel is. So it feels to me.
And that is their power. Geofencing,
that's all I got to say.
And I did make a big point of that in the video. I put a whole section on the fact there is no geofencing on the Autel drones at all for now.
And this is your short video that you managed to complete quickly, and
as always, they take too long, and they've released a firmware which adds lots of new features. But I wouldn't have covered them in the new video. How long was it? Let me just have a look. It was too long now. So it
3 hours.
It's
3 hours. Yeah,
it was 3 hours. Where is it? Nano review. Here it is. Let me.
It's like going to the cinema. You're going for that hour and a half film, and you suddenly
realize it was 41 minutes. Which is too long.
I'm surprised the battery lasted that long.
And, to be fair, the battery is very good on it. But it's too long. I couldn't have crammed any more in. And it's a good product. But I think their big problem is price. And we know DJI's biggest advantage is their manufacturing capability and their volume. And what they can do, as always, is walk in and take 200 quid off that. And I'll be honest, I think we all know it will be a very, very, very good product, short of them having some silly issues. And there will be a really hard reason to not buy it, other than what Bruce has said there about geofencing.
But does DJI have to knock 200 quid off? They could do it £100 cheaper.
They could.
$100 cheaper.
It depends how much they want to slam them. But you got to. It's a tough market, because the Mavic Air is already in that £800 area. So that's their issue. But it's not even just those leaks this week. There's lots and lots of news this week. There's lots of leaks of potential in new FPV system, Vision 3. In fact, it's not leaks. It looks like it's happening. And we've seen 3 completely independent things. I'm going to try and do a dedicated video on it, because I did cover it on the live stream a bit, but not as a sort of separate thing. But we've now had today people finding references to it in new versions of software. which is always a sign that it's coming around the corner. We've had a screenshot, which is allegedly shared from Cadex, which is interesting. It is Cadex's people. Their name is on the screenshot, so there's no hiding from that. And it looks like a new version of the FPV with Betaflight OSD, with the stuff people complained about. And there's been another further confirmation of V3 goggles. No hardware seen, nothing in hand, but there's been, because the guys are concentrating on the software a lot now, they're digging into stuff an awful lot, and they're starting to see. The only issue will be for people is what DJI are very likely to do here is release a new product with the features everyone has been screaming about on the V1 system, and you're going to have to pay to get them.
It's not going to be backwardly compatible.
Chances are no.
Yeah. Now, did your GPS arrive? I can't remember where we were last week.
It has. The Mavic 3 GPS is here. I've put, I'd hate to, I reckon I'm probably 60, 70 hours. It's been every evening. It was over half the weekend. I'm hoping to get the video finished. I've made the video once and then had to go back and change 80% of it because my conclusions just kept shifting. But I just needed more time, and I needed more time to learn more about U-blocks. And I think the biggest thing from this will be the learning I've had from U-blocks and how the modules work and all of the behaviors. The plan is it probably will be next week's video. It'll be finished this week, but it will be, I'll plan it for Monday or Tuesday's big video. And we will be addressing some of the accusations of DJI using an inferior chipset. We will be looking at its actual performance in comparison to other modules. We're going to put real data down and put away the conversation of, is the module good or bad? We can't answer everything. What I don't have is a Mavic 3 in hand. I'd love to have a Mavic 3, put the data lines in permanently and be able to look at that in real time to see how the module's behaving in the aircraft. But I've even blasted as much RF at it as I can throw. I don't see there being any problems. I think I know what's going on, but I don't think it's necessarily a problem.
Fair play. Right, that's it. DJI done for today. That's it, done.
Have they paid you your weekly check then, Gary? Is that what?
Oh yes. No, it's just we descend into huge conversations about DJI every week, and in reality, there's an awful lot of other stuff going on, particularly in the delivery world. That people keep doing stuff. Okay, Urban Air Mobility is pushing out mega bullshit at the minute. And somebody did explain to me why they do that and why they can get all these mythical pre-sales of their aircraft. One manufacturer's got 1,500 sold in pre-sales and how that all worked. But it all rushed over my head as something that's just bullshit. But the cargo stuff is working. And Richard's company, Altitude Angel, is... Well, you're creating a car. How you unpack it for me? What are you making that are making a big thing of in England, or a lot of?
We're hoping to have a little bit of government support as part of a competition that we've currently bid for to take our superhighway technology, which is effectively an open commercial drone zone in which any company can apply to fly any type of vehicle for any legal purpose, from inspection, cargo delivery, and maybe in the future UAM type operations, and can apply to do that on kind of fair and equal terms in unsegregated and segregated airspace, like controlled airspace. So we have a test facility down in Reading today, which is, for those of you that don't know the UK, that's west of Heathrow Airport by about 45 minutes on the car, not very far. And it crisscrosses lots of very awkward terrain, goes over a major highway, goes over major infrastructure like power lines, as well as the major railway into and out of London. And it's about 8 kilometres long. And the proposal under Skyway effectively is to take that out from 8 kilometres to 265.5 kilometres, or 165 miles. And that would connect the cities of Reading, Oxford, Milton Keynes, Cambridge, Coventry and Rugby together in a large superhighway capacity, and people will be able to fly any combination of journeys within that, whether it's just around one of those locations for a survey or something, or maybe they want to transit the entire length. They'll be able to do all of that under the superhighway concept. So that's the goal.
Can I ask a couple of questions?
Just go on then.
Richard. So in the UK then, urban air mobility aircraft don't exist yet. There's no pilot training for them yet. So that's kind of some time away. But if I came to your system and I brought, say, my Believer, which I can do 200 miles easy. So I can fly through the system. But without an OSC, the CAA will never let me put that aircraft in the air. And if I applied today for that OSC, I would not get it until God knows when. We know fall now, aren't we? So it's 04. So it'll probably take them 10 months to do it. It won't be this year that any drone company could use your flight corridor. That's the sad thing, because it would take so long for the CAA to get through the OSC for me to be able to go and actually fly something in your corridor. Regardless, that's the niggle. It's the regulator, no one else.
So I share the frustration. I think the regulator certainly can act a lot faster, and it's certainly not just here in the UK, but further abroad. But actually, there are a lot of companies that have already been through phase 2 with us on under something called Project Accelerate, which already have operating permissions within the Arrow zones. But actually, one of the goals behind Skyway is, although we can't eliminate whatever regulatory requirements are going to be put in place on airworthiness, it's not part of the Skyway proposition. You have to rock up with an airworthy vehicle according to whatever definition is applicable at that time. What we can do is, and this is what we're working towards now, is to have the Arrow technology, which sits behind Skyway, certified and recognized by the CAA, such that you need only mention that as part of your OSC, and the principal part of your operation, which is BVLOS navigation, will be effectively taken over by Guardian, the platform that sits behind that, together with all of the legal responsibility for the safe conduct of that flight. So it's certainly very, very challenging to navigate all of those requirements, because again, one of the biggest delays is actually educating our regulator in what the technology can do, and then going through a process of certification to have the underlying Arrow technology certified as something called a ground-based detect and avoid solution, which is effectively how the system works.
So my next question is, you've come up with this Sky Corridor, so I'm just going to assume that everything in that route, you've had to approach every farmer's airfield and everything. You've had to do a lot of work behind the scenes. It must be monstrous. But let's say I've got a field survey. What heights are these skyways? If I want to fly my drone and I'm not part of your skyway, I'm not going to call you or anything. I'm just going to go and fly in that field. At what height does the skyway exist? Am I going to be in it?
You very well could be in it, and actually that's part of the proposition for Skyway, is that not every drone is required to cooperate with Skyway. I mean, if you want to benefit from the navigation services that we're going to provide, then you are going to have to cooperate with the kind of operating procedures and the technology that we provide to do that. But the whole purpose of the Skyway technology is to support integration. And by that, we mean the ability of any GA pilots, the ability of any commercial aviation to just carry on doing what it does in the zones it already does. And then equally, any drone pilot that just wants to fly but doesn't want to benefit from the Skyway service itself can still pop up and fly whatever it is they want to fly in that zone, providing, of course, they're still abiding by the ANO and they're still following all the regulations. The purpose of the DAA technology is to recognize that there is now an uncontrollable vehicle in the vicinity, and to direct controllable traffic out of harm's way, out of its way. So in other words, move past and carry on.
So that's really interesting then, because you're going to have these big long corridors then. So let's say I show my model plane, which has it doesn't pump anything out to the world. All it does is my transmitter to the aircraft, the most basic of things. How does it, I suppose you can't really say too much how it sees that, because that's kind of interesting in my head, how your system's going to see that model plane flying in that airspace. And of course, a model plane isn't limited to 400 feet.
Correct. And again, neither is the Skyway technology. The Skyway technology has a theoretical vertical maxima of about 15 kilometers in terms of sensing and detection range. That doesn't mean that we will be providing navigation services at all anywhere close to that, either horizontal or that vertical maxima. It's just the theoretical range of the sensing equipment, of which we use a variety of different sensors on board. So it'd be very, very easy for us to add constraints. And actually, one of the things we're in discussions with the CAA about is perhaps taking sections of the corridor or a route in there or a zone, and then perhaps in conjunction with the regulator having more permissive operations. So maybe, and I'm just picking numbers out of literally thin air here, but imagine an area where you could fly up to 3,000 feet and 3 kilometers away from the tower versus the rest of the corridor, which might be sub 1,000 feet and a kilometer wide across the corridor. So it allows us to create these testing zones or experimental zones where more permissive use is enabled, whilst we continue to gather the evidence on the efficacy of the system for the CAA.
So that's what your corridor one is. You will be doing it, your first corridor, basically.
Yeah, correct.
Richard, so in many ways, it almost sounds like you're almost going to build a permission in itself. You know, if you think you were talking about the aircraft earlier, so you're not going to be dealing with the flight worthiness, but from your software point of view, in my eyes, it sort of opens the door for there to be almost ready to grow aircraft. In the sense of the technology's on board, the aircraft's ready to go. From a regulation point of view, it's this manufacturer complies with all of what we need. This aircraft automatically passes X, Y, and Z, and almost like a standard permission could be put in place based on that and not have to go through the whole rigmarole of the whole special permission every single time as well.
Yeah, I mean, there are still a lot of unknowns, I think, in terms of how the CAA might adopt or approach the final regulatory approval for it. But certainly one of the instruments that we're exploring in some depth is something called a PDRA, or predefined risk assessment. So that's effectively the operational characteristics of the superhighway are well known and pre-risk assessed by the CAA. That doesn't negate any of the obligations of an operator that wants to come and fly within that zone. But what it does do is seriously reduce the complexity and the proof burden that an operator would need to provide. Like I say, it doesn't eliminate it altogether, but certainly at the moment, if you, as you'll all be aware, if you approach the CAA or the equivalent in virtually every Western country and say, I would like to fly BVLOS automated, please, there is a flow chart and it normally ends in no.
I thought it started at no.
It will end in a, you need a TDA or you need segregated airspace. And actually, a couple of years ago, when we first approached the Innovation Sandbox and said what we were trying to achieve, and actually one of the most fundamental things we need to demonstrate is the ability of the technology to detect cooperative and uncooperative, crewed and uncrewed aviation. The very first thing the CAA tried to direct us to do was apply for a TDA. And of course, that removes the ability of us to just even sense regular and normal air traffic because it's all been excluded. So, you know, we had to kind of work on a whole mechanism of, a campaign of education and a campaign of pain for us, effectively, to try and walk through the process to getting to where we are today. And so we still got some way to go. But again, the technology is now no longer a limiting factor. The technology is no longer a blocker. We've operated in Reading now for just over a year with a very significant amount of evidence that we've captured and gathered, efficacy of cameras, efficacy of passive and active RF, electro-optical systems, acoustic systems, all working together. Now we need to actually start flying.
You can actually fly from A to B then. You can actually fly through your whole corridor. That must be hell of an OSC. That must be hell of an operational safety case.
Yeah, I think anyone that knows us knows that we typically tend to try really hard things. It's hard getting approvals for a handful of operators to do this under an 8-kilometer test zone. Obviously, it's even harder still to be able to effectively create a kind of a template. It's a terrible phrase, but a template safety case that allows anyone that kind of says, I'm going to operate my business, I'm going to operate these drones, but I'm going to do it in a narrow zone, and therefore to know that actually the Arrow Zone is taking over the primary responsibility for safe transit of the vehicle. But I do think it's just worth setting out as well that one of the most important things that we've adapted into Skyway, or built into Skyway, is the ability for it to work with any vehicle from any manufacturer. And the reason that's key is we haven't built a kind of proprietary command and control protocol that requires us to be able to speak quote unquote DJI or to speak Mavlink. Effectively what we do is we have, I'm aware I'm speaking to a very well educated audience on drones here, and I don't always have to do that, but to explain the way it works, we normally say we have some software which acts a lot like a digital co-pilot, and what it does is remain in constant contact with the Arrow Tower service. And as the systems principally responsible for the flight and the guidance of the aircraft continue to route that aircraft safely, whether that's via Mavlink or something else, what our software comes along and does is occasionally it will nudge the captain or the autopilot and say, by the way, you need to somehow get yourself to this coordinate, or reduce your speed or increase your speed, because we're aware of a conflict that we'd like you to avoid. So the system is able to do that hundreds of times per second as aircraft fly.
So does that mean then, if I was to fly in your corridor, I would tell your system my aircraft cruising speed? So I could say, look, this is my minimum cruising speed, this is my maximum cruising speed, and then how about I fly with I've got an orange cube which automatically will detect other aircraft anyway. Does that conflict with the system as well, or does it override one or the other?
No, I mean, I'm just seeing some of the comments coming in. Sorry, it's hard not to laugh at these as they come in. I mean, firstly, the cube autopilot is obviously only going to detect other aircraft within a particular conspicuity range, right? So what we have is effectively a declaration, a digital declaration that gets made on takeoff, which is effectively a small exchange of payload information and capability information about the vehicle. And that's recognizing the fact that, we could probably do all of this one time during a setup or an onboarding, but the challenge is aircraft change, people change equipment on it. So actually on a per flight basis, you kind of declare and you say, okay, I've got a detect and avoid capability. I'm 80% certain I can see 90% of the things within a 1 kilometer bubble of me, and I can only do that if they are conspicuous electronically. And what Arrow will do underneath that is adapt the guidance that it gives, so that if it suddenly sees you off course, it will query and say, why are you off course? And you will provide a blip of information from your sensors that adapts in our system. And then we register that your drone has seen something that perhaps we haven't, and therefore we need to be aware of that. So we'll then attempt to validate that digitally and in near real time. And if that works, then everything's great. If there's a problem still, we'll yield to the systems local to the drone, because there's always an assumption that what we call the last mile or the last ditch sensors on the drone are going to be slightly greater efficacy than the very significant infrastructure we'll have on the ground. So not every aircraft, though, carries those. And as we've spoken about, I think on this show before, no one magical sensor exists that you can carry around that can detect everything, including the stuff, like your fixed wing plane, Mark, that doesn't have any kind of radio control or anything like that. Maybe just release it and it GPS self guides itself through the sky. So we can see those things, we can monitor those things, we can see commercial aircraft, GA, paragliders, parachutists, we can even see kites and things like that, both the aircraft type on a string as well as the bird type, which are the red kite is native to Berkshire, and it shows up on its sensors a lot.
No, but since they were reintroduced, let's get first to Mitchell's comments. 2 comments. First, how much will it cost to fly in the Skyway?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think initially, and I'm just speaking broadly about the business model, initially we're having to sink many millions of pounds into the deployment of that capability, which is one of the reasons why we're asking the government, effectively why we bid to co-fund this with a bit of public money, because it is a public capability. But the cost of using Skyway to go BVLOS will be higher initially and come down over time. And it will come down over time when the volume goes up. So we think that there is at least a 10 to 15 year service life out of the equipment that we'll initially deploy, but we'll probably need to refresh that or supplement that with additional sensor capability as these great new sensors come on board. But our own calculations indicate the cost initially could be as low as anywhere from between 10 and 15 pence per minute of BVLOS flight capability. Where that slightly changes, of course, is, for example, larger aircraft, and I'm talking, we do have a couple of partners that we're speaking to that are building sort of 15-meter wingspan fixed wing drones. They will actually fly quite low and quite slow initially. So we don't want to penalize people that have to fly quite slow from the OSC perspective in terms of the charge. So we're exploring what will work for different classifications of customer. But this is not a system for recreational users. It's a system for commercial use of drones. We're not envisaging, by the way, just to be really clear, certainly in the next year to 2 years, coffee delivery by a drone. It just doesn't make sense. We're talking about high value medical deliveries, equipment movement, etc., perhaps high value surveying jobs, where both the operator of the service is getting paid a substantial amount, and they can afford to pay a minor amount.
Why should that survey that today flying? I mean, how wide is it, that corridor? The corridor.
Well, the proposals right now would be about 1 kilometre in diameter across each tower. So if you imagine, it's a crude way of imagining it, but imagine a bunch of points on a map going from here all the way up to Birmingham, and everywhere that there's a tower, you drew a line that was 1 kilometre across, and then you connected all of those lines. That gives you a rough indication of the kind of what we call the primary route zone for Skyway. But again, the theoretical maximum on that is at least 10 kilometres out. So as we build up the evidence, we feel much more confident in the efficacy of the system as the flight volumes go up. We can digitally change the routing and change the characteristics of different segments.
More chance.
Yeah, so it's a bit like, it is a lot like a railway if you think about the linear capability of how it's developing. But unlike a railway, we can simply publish new software instructions that suddenly create new tracks or create vertical tracks as well. So initially, I think the phrase is crawl, walk, and run, right? We've got to deploy this infrastructure, and initially we'll have a southbound and a northbound lane. And then as we continue, there's a ramp up period where we'll say, okay, well, we'll actually start to have multiple north and southbound lanes, and then we'll start to vertically stack them and experiment with different traffic patterns. So there's
why does that? Sorry, Richard, to jump in, but why? Because I'm got to say it while I remember it. Why should the survey that currently would pay nothing to use that airspace have to be paying for to be in that area?
The reality is they don't. Arrow carries no regulatory.
Okay, so they wouldn't have to. If they wanted. So
if you still want to go and run a manually piloted or remote piloted operation under your existing OSC, even in a narrow zone, crack on. There's nothing to stop you.
Okay.
What Arrow is designed to do, and the Skyway system is designed to support, is a pathway for any organization that wants to start removing the pilot from the loop, or having one pilot controlling potentially a fleet of aircraft by doing an automated BVLOS.
So have you run this up the railways, or have you run this up and down power lines?
So we got to do, the first step was to identify a likely route. And we're quite happy that the route that we put together crisscrosses really exciting infrastructure. So there are warehouses and depots and business parks. It's deliberately not crossing, as tons and tons of residential areas. It does cross many because obviously it's impossible to go that distance and not cover some. But it's designed to crisscross where all the industrial infrastructure is. As much as possible, we're adjacent to railway infrastructure or major highway infrastructure. But it's not the primary determinant. There are other factors such as, from a land perspective, where is it best for us to site our tower infrastructure? Can we co-locate on other equipment that's already available? What's the particular risk profile of the area? Are we in the proximity of an airport? Are we right next to a heliport? There are lots of things to consider. Actually, right down where we are in Berkshire at our test facility, we've got John Radcliffe Hospital, which has a helipad on it. We get the Thames Valley Air Ambulance Service frequently transiting. We also get Chinooks flying over. There's a military, RAF Benson is around the corner. So there's a lot of interesting air traffic in the vicinity. And as we go and scale that up across 265 kilometers, there's even more interesting use cases along the way. So again, that's why it's key. And I really want to make this point. The presence of Arrow doesn't stop anybody going about and using the sky in the way that they currently do today. But the presence of Arrow does provide another opportunity if the people that are looking at those operations and thinking, how do I scale this? How do I potentially, as a one-man band, for example, do a railway survey over 100 miles? Arrow would be the solution to that.
Richard,
a solution to that.
I'm going to ask you the controversial and difficult question now. So, I am a legitimate user of your service. We've paid, we're done, we're on. I'm flying my nice big fixed wing aircraft with the diamond ring on board that my rich foreign investor wants flown from London to the northern area. And
asked to do this.
On board the flight, something goes wrong in the sense of another aircraft encroaches the airspace, your system kicks in, a void happens. Unfortunately, the aircraft crashes into a property, goes on fire. I lose the ring and burn someone's house down. Where does the liability stand at that point, Richard? Because no one's done anything wrong.
Well, first off, I would say someone clearly has made a mistake somewhere. But actually, if I was a lawyer, I'm not. I just want to hasten to add before anyone jumps in on the comments. But the first thing a lawyer would tell me is it sounds like there's a lot of liability in there in lots of different areas. But certainly our job, and again, I come back to where I started. We've really tried to tackle the meaty, difficult questions that most people shirk initially. Responsibility for the flight should be the responsibility of the company that is taking, in other words, providing the service. So, for example, today, if Mark goes out and flies for a customer and they retain him and he alone makes all the piloting decisions, it's him that goes to prison when he loses the diamond ring and sets a house on fire. However, if Mark chooses, and it's permitted under the regulation, to discharge a proportion of his responsibility for the navigation of that flight to us, and we are culpable because we have acted in a way which is negligent or has deliberately perhaps caused an incident, or through our negligence has caused an incident, then that's our fault. That's our problem. And we have to take that. We're working right now on putting together very large and very bespoke insurance policies for such a thing. And you can imagine the possible permutation of edge case and risk is being discussed there. But then there's, of course, because I just want to touch on it really quickly, we're never going to be responsible for the cargo, for instance. If we're culpable for a negligent decision that we gave that actually resulted in the crashing of your aircraft, then that would be a very different case. But if the system functions and it diverts you and it sends you an instruction for you to move your aircraft, and then you either fail to move your aircraft or you move your aircraft in an erratic and dangerous way that wasn't in line with the OSC that you submitted, then that would still be the consumer's problem or the operator's problem. But again, one of the functions of the Skyway Corridor is to audit everything it sees. And it records that cryptographically in a way that we can't modify. And that means that if there is an incident, we can pull back any microsecond of activity for any location in the vicinity of the corridor and replay it and work out what the hell happened. So I think it's right to call out those questions, right? Who is liable is the very first question. And actually, when we were having engineering discussions nearly 5 years ago, every engineer we spoke to was like, I'm sorry, you want us to do what? You want us to build a system that means we're responsible for a flight that we can't actually see? Yes, that's the goal. And ever since then, everything we've built has been around building to being able to commercially, reasonably stand behind that with a set of warranties and a set of assurances for our customers as well.
The detection piece that Mitchell mentions, you've had your corridors, you've had your towers, you've got an 8-kilometer run. You tell me this if you can, but I mean, how many towers are required for that 8 kilometers? And then, of course, the next question is, how well does that scale over 200 kilometers?
Yeah, well, actually, surprisingly, the bid that we put together to extend the corridor in Reading, which is 2 towers, by the way, one at either extent of the corridor at the moment. And rather than transit past each tower, you effectively loop around the tower and come back. So each tower is the end of the line, effectively. The Skyway proposal for the 165 miles is actually 29 towers. So it's not thousands of towers. It's not billions of land parcels that we have to go off and negotiate. 29 towers is the amount that we've determined in our preliminary surveys that we would feel comfortable with deploying. We can add more. And if we add more, it increases our resolution. We can add fewer. And of course, it potentially changes our resolution. But the towers themselves, remember, they have a significant amount of overlap in their detection radii on each one. And actually, we aren't only using our towers exclusively. Remember, we're hooked into several aviation feeds. We have letters of intent and operating agreements in place with fleet operators. So we're already able to see a lot more in a consolidated fashion than probably any single UAS sensor could. And the towers themselves don't carry a single UAS sensor. They carry several counter-UAS systems, but then they also carry electro-optical systems, and we're running several different methods altogether to fuse that to create what we call a combined air picture, which gives us a really high success rate. So I try to keep an eye on all of the questions that are coming in. I think there was a question in there around from Mitchell, and based on the research, what US detection beyond 1 to 2 miles is incredibly difficult. He's definitely not wrong. But again, there is a broad distinction to make between detection and identification. The identification piece we're much less concerned with. We're much more concerned with there is something in the sky that we weren't expecting. And as long as we can triangulate approximately where that is, the traffic control parameters that we have in our network allow us to mitigate that risk reasonably. And remember, aviation isn't about the elimination of all the risk. It is about the reasonable mitigation of the majority of it, the majority of the time. And we're comfortable with that at the moment.
So what about wind turbines then? Because they cause systems a lot of issues. So
yeah, they're a nightmare for radar. Yeah, they're a nightmare for radar. But I mean, I think there are ANSPs in the world that get paid a stupid amount of money to consult on how to solve their own problem, really, which is you're going to have to pay us, dear wind farm owner, to deploy another radar system the other side of the wind farm to deal with all the scatter. But again, the reality is we're not solely dependent on using, for instance, an active system. We also have electro-optical systems which are impervious to spinning turbine blades.
So have you not sold your system to the wind turbine companies to detect what's on the other side, to then pump it to the ATCs that need to know? Come on, Richard, there's a moneymaker there.
I'm sure there's a separate revenue stream, shall we say, in the future for providing insight into what's occurring within the facility.
If you want to fund your corridor, there's your moneymaker for it, okay? Just go sell your towers to those systems.
It's an interesting one, but the towers themselves collect a lot of data, and actually the majority of that data is stored but not really used. The only time it gets used is when our fusion system detects that there is something that could be a problem, and we actually need to do something about that. And at that point, that's when we start to interpret and actively analyze that data. What's that without RF detection? I know zero detection technologies and geolocated drone the size of a believer.
About 2 meters across.
About 2 meters phony.
Yeah. Without RF detection, of zero detection technologies, that's good for us because it means of zero detection technologies that we're using, Mitchell. But we are fairly confident that we can see something of that size, certainly at that distance, in a way that
we need to send Mark down to Reading. He could be on the north side of Reading, and there's some lovely pubs up north of Reading, up around Henley Way. That would be would Henley be 10 miles north of your corridor, something like that, wouldn't it?
It sounds about the right order of magnitude. I don't have a as the crow flies list in my head.
Or you can go down to Fair Oaks and annoy them, or go to Farnborough and annoy them. They're down on the other corner.
I've flown at Farnborough many times.
Yeah, I know. But yeah. I mean that's for Mitchell that could be it could be an interesting video for us to create with you or something. Is spot the thing. And well, Mark's actually been involved in quite a few counter UAS trials, and I know from some that I've been involved in, you can defeat 99% of them. If you know what you're doing, you can definitely defeat 99% of them. The only ones I know that work really well are the acoustic ones. So far, they work really, really well. All the other stuff you can beat.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that there is a lot of interest from people in how we're doing what we're doing. And Mitchell's question again there is very provocative, and I'm not going to respond to it directly except to say, remember, our job is not to build the network that can sense the smallest object the furthest away. That's not the intent. That's the intent of a counter UAS company that wants to sell a solution to defend, quote unquote, the airspace. Our job is to see everything that we need to see to comfortably mitigate the risk of an aircraft transiting between towers at a comfortable distance. And of that, I'm absolutely certain we can do very confidently. And I know that because we've been recording evidence now for 372 days, basically 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We've got terabytes of information. And for reference, the Saab G1X is a fantastic radar system, but you won't find one on our network, principally because of the cost. If it was necessary for us to deploy every tower with a 5 to 15 million euro radar system, not only would it be prohibitive for anyone to fly there, but also probably Ofcom would have an absolute hissy fit, and we would never deploy 165 of them. So again, we've got to be really, really, really careful about making the assumption that Arrow is all about seeing everything as far away as possible. It's not. It's actually about comfortably mitigating the risk within the corridor zone so that everybody can be comfortable with the flight dynamics.
Yeah, so you're going to have your tower, and then let's say on the left, because we're in the UK, we drive on the left. So on the left-hand side of the tower, everything could be going north, and then on the right-hand side, and then coming back, everything will be left again. So you go up on the left, you come back on the left. You know what I mean? It's like a road. That would do your mitigations for you going north and south. Dead simple, wouldn't it? And that'd be quite nice. And it gives you, what, a kilometre either side of the tower to take avoiding action. Half a kilometre.
It's a kilometre diameter currently, yeah.
So 500 metres to play with to do avoiding action. Is 500? So what does the system see as a safe distance then from another object in the air? What does it consider to be the safe bubble around?
I'd like to join in with that with my little. Also, so you're going to follow the standard rules of the air for manned aviation.
And is it open
source? What, the air?
The rules of the air is open source.
No, the Altitude Angel system, is it going open source? Can we download it from GitHub?
No, and there would be no point in you doing that because you then wouldn't have the Arrow infrastructure to run it on. So although you can certainly download the SDK, which will be open source, so that you can connect to the Arrow infrastructure. But again, no, you will not be able to create your own Arrow towers. What we will do, however, is license other companies to build them so that they can take them to other countries and deploy more of them. And I encourage anyone that's interested in where that might go, without me speaking out of turn, to have a look at the Skyway bid and see the consortiums to try and work out who might be interested in doing that. The rules of the air is an interesting one. Simply put, there isn't any rules of the air for a drone superhighway system, and we're trying to work out what they should be. There is a factor.
But wouldn't the regulators sort of default to the manned rules of the air?
Yeah, but where it gets interesting is then starting to understand if we just look at the drones that we're controlling, then yes, it's very easy to apply a body of regulation that already exists. But where it gets really niche and interesting, we've had risk discussions actually with several folks in the CAA around this, is what should the instruction to a drone that isn't in conflict with another cooperative drone be if a non-cooperative drone appears, and there is a set of conversations that follows, and then there is also, okay, but what about if it's, instead of an uncooperative drone, what if it's an air ambulance? Or what actually if it's none of those things and it's just a GA pilot, on a recreational flight? Well, of course, we should yield to the crewed aircraft. Okay, what if the drone is carrying a human heart for transplant? So, there are iterations of this conversation that don't work today,
Mm.
given the current body of regulation that exists, and we're pushing the boundaries in trying to understand what that is. But just from a pure avoidance perspective, then as you guys will know, right, things happen quite quickly with a small unmanned aircraft compared to a larger crewed aircraft. And if we're also factoring in the fact that on our corridor there could be as many as 1,000 or 2,000 of these aircraft between towers at any point, then the time to react is also a lot less. So the avoiding actions have to take into account not just that dynamic, but they also have to take into account latency on the network or latency on the processing time. And that's not static, as you know. As you move, the quality of reception changes, maybe the availability of a tower changes, and the tower is in the middle of a changeover from cellular communications to satellite communications. There is an absolute body of regulation which needs to really help out and come forwards here, and we're contributing to that.
So why? I'm just trying to think how to word this. So why don't you say, or why doesn't Altitude Angel just? Why do you wait for the regulator? Why are you waiting? Why don't you just go? Because if you're going to wait for the CAA, Richard, you may as well go and watch the sea erode a coastline, because that's how long it'll take for something to move.
Well, we have a fun saying, right? Continents drift faster than our regulators tend to move, right?
Yeah.
So I'm with you on this. I mean, the regulators have got. I want to be clear, right? Regulators have a really tough job. I'm not crapping on regulators here, but they don't move fast enough. Period. And secondly, we're definitely not waiting for them, right? So actually, if we waited for regulatory certification to do the full DAA automated BVLOS down at Reading, we'd still be waiting because it's not there yet. We've got to start building out the technology and collecting more evidence, working with approved partners who have gone through the pain of individually getting OSC approvals to fly within the arrow zones, they're kind of like the early pioneers who are taking the pain to build up the body of evidence. So effectively the CAA can understand what is actually going to be the effect of saying, okay, now it's certified as a ground-based DAA system. So it's tough, but we're not waiting, and we encourage everyone to apply pressure.
Like I said, I'm just trying to understand, what do you consider a safe distance then? So drone and drone, I would say, if you can tell which way they're both flying, what speed, if they're in your corridor, of course, it would be easy for the one that's in your corridor just to climb above 400 feet. That's simple, easy, avoiding the other drone. However, when it comes to manned aviation, what do you consider to be too close?
The right answer to that is I'm going to consider anything or nothing to be too close, right? The reality is the system on day zero will have a set of dynamics that keep aircraft at least a tower apart from each other, right? And
so how far are the towers apart?
Well, I was just about to say, we haven't completed the route survey, but depending on that, that could be a minimum of 3 to 5 kilometers and a maximum of 10 to 15. Right? So initially, we'll have distance. Obviously, is a wonderful thing when you factor in latency and time because they're very closely related. But secondly, that's not the only characteristic that the system evaluates when it's trying to work out what is too close for comfort. So, for example, if you have a mythical drone that has 7G connectivity and it's ultra low latency, ultra high bandwidth, and it can get data to us virtually at the speed of light with no latency, that's great. But even that drone might suffer along the route, and it might suddenly drop down to a refresh rate of maybe once every 2 or 3 seconds. Now, the system monitors the latency throughout the entire duration of the flight and will dynamically adjust the routing and what we call the safety buffers around every aircraft based on one variable there being the latency, the other also being the directional velocity of the aircraft, another being the capability of your aircraft, and then the third, or rather our introduced variable here, is a probability analysis about where we think you might be over any number of scenarios in the intervening period of time. So, for instance, we might try and project that in the next 5 seconds, there's a 50% possibility you could actually be over here. So the system, when it's taking into account routing instructions to other aircraft, cooperative aircraft, won't route things into areas that you could feasibly be that we weren't expecting. So it's far more complicated than just saying 100 meters is the answer. But there is a policy, effectively a policy decision that we'll make, and that will be worked on with the CAA, which will effectively put the brakes on initially and gently release them, as you'd expect, right? That's the CAA's job, is to keep us all safe and stop crazy companies like us doing amazing things. Sorry, I mean, trying to change.
But, I mean, are you going to end up with like trains of delivery drones going up and down your corridor at a fixed spacing, and then you can always dots and dash. You could have the opposite train going the other way.
I love the questions, right? Because the fact is, until you're crazy enough to conceive of a technology that can do this, you're not aware of all the questions and all the things that people might conceivably think they could do with it. And that's part of the reason that we're so keen to build the capability, because it's not for us to prescribe really what people want to fly on it or why they want to do it. As long as it's legal, which is obviously the prime requirement for us, then we would like to be able to support all. It's definitely not going to support Bruce's missile. I'm just going to call that. I really wouldn't classify anything.
I want to see his missile.
We're going to make a mission patch for that.
Well, don't expect me to cooperate then.
Yeah, I don't see anything cooperative about a missile, is all I'm saying, Bruce. But also, it might be a little bit too fast for us to comfortably deal with, especially if it's one of your hypersonic variants. But yeah, overall, I think we've been approached by a lot of different companies that want to or are building aircraft to do all sorts of amazing things, quite frankly. And of course, cargo is a prime one for a lot of people. And cargo splits down into packages, which are mail effectively, but also human cargo, and more specifically pathological samples, blood samples, life-saving tests and things like that. That's fantastic. We want to encourage all of that early in the corridor. But we've also been approached by companies that are thinking about formation flying within the corridor. So I guess that's the train effectively, right? Yeah. We'd like to understand how to build up to all of that, but initially I think we're going to be looking at kind of single flights. You might have a fleet of aircraft, but they're not flying in a formation pattern up the length of the corridor. We're popping them off one at a time after a safe distance as part expired.
You could do it, Richard, because all you've got to do is you have one closer to the tower, say within 100 meters of a tower. You put the other one out at 400 meters, then you just offset them like this by 100 meters, and literally you could have them just staggered then in a flight and just go for it. Then you'll see how good your system is, because when it detects something that shouldn't be there, it's going to have to tell them to circle back round to feed back in correctly. So it'll tell the front two, right, you're going to brake now, you come round and come back round and join back in. And then the next two, will they have to or whatever? That will work really well.
I bet most of the time speed's going to be the thing that they
and wind direction.
Speed is a really interesting one, because obviously most fixed-wing aircraft can't stop, right? So they have to keep going. Everyone says, "Oh, your system's a lot like autonomous cars." And we say, "Well, actually, no, because an autonomous car, really confused, can just stop." But actually, a fixed-wing aircraft, if it does that, isn't going to be an aircraft for very long. So we have to take all of that into account. And when we've also run and been running and still are running very significant simulations where you get these interesting network or ripple effects build when you take an avoiding action 165 miles away. You get a very rapid onset butterfly effect, effectively, depending on the constraints that you've applied to the corridor, depending on how many traffic you've got in the corridor, whether
you release another video of that sort of thing. I want to watch that video of things happening at a distance. You did have some simulation videos a long time ago.
Well, I've just had another thought. So the front two are taking the avoiding action, but as they turn, they could climb to come up to a new height, and then the next two will join them and come up again. So they'd be climbing in height to take avoiding the action to continue in the corridor.
The main difference I see coming from the manned aviation world is the possibilities for more creative avoiding action that wouldn't be possible in the manned world, because the controller, especially if it was me, has to identify the problem. That could take anything up to 2.5 hours. And then once he's identified the problem, he has to then tell the aircraft what it's got to do, and then the aircraft's got to do it. But in this system, it's going to be almost instantaneous. So you're opening up a whole sort of Pandora's box of ways. And that's why I wanted to talk about the manned aviation regs earlier, because if you have to comply with that, well, you're buggered. You're back at square one. You're not advancing the getting out of the way technology in any way at all.
That's it. I mean, that's the challenge right now, is that the starting place for most of this stuff is what do we do today? And I understand that, because that's a safe and well understood environment. But actually, it's also like trying to apply a set of understanding to a new technology, to a new way of working, which just doesn't make sense anymore. And the constant crux of the conversations we have, both at home and abroad, is generally, it's not that the new technology is trying to do anything unsafe. It's that you're typically failing to recognize that the new technology could improve the safety situation, and you can't recognize how it could be doing that because you're not asking the questions. You're simply saying no. Or actually, the way to do this is to just close the sky to everything else. And that's so against the very fiber of everything we're trying to achieve with Arrow and with Skyway, that it's just ludicrous to suggest that actually that's the way that we scale these operations. So again, one of the reasons we chose the route that we chose is that it actually does crisscross and go through, and quite often it skirts controlled airspace very deliberately. But actually there are route zones that we deliberately penetrate into controlled airspace or into the FRZ of an airport, for instance, because it's simply easier. But again, we're all screwed, aren't we, if we rely on the ATM providers to start trying to provide an ATM-like service to a drone. So that's never going to scale, and it's going to cost factors more than anything.
So when the system's near an FRZ or skimming it, if you like, or even maybe it goes into the FRZ to deliver to the airport, does that mean the ATC there will have it on a screen? They've got it, they're going to have it on their screen, they can see what's going on.
Yeah, so we're working, all the airports that are within the vicinity of the route are receiving Guardian UTM Enterprise, which is a solution which effectively enables digital flight permissions to be managed inside the airport or inside the operations center, effectively as a remote, because we also work with at least one provider who has got a remote capacity. And that gives us the ability to say, before the drone takes off, here's our intended route. We're going to be coming through your airspace. Do you approve that portion of the flight, yes or no? If you don't approve it, then Arrow will try and suggest an alternative route. If it can't suggest one, it will tell you that it can't satisfy the requirements that you've asked us to satisfy for this part of your route. Would you like to change your route and try again, recognizing that that airport's a problem, or would you simply like to just go as far as you can? So, there are lots of options and eventualities that come out of it, but what we're trying to do is also secure options for people to take off and land from infrastructure which is not an airport en route. And as you guys will know, right, as commercial operators, you're probably principally more affected by where you can base your operation than being able to simply check an airspace map or something like that, right? If you're outside the controlled airspace, you've got to figure out where can I use that car park? Is it private land, etc.?
Well, so here's the next crux, and this will be people that want to use your corridors' next big problem. So it's great you're going to build the corridor. It's fantastic. But do you know what the next big problem actually behind that is, apart from the regulator? There's one last niggle.
Only one. I'm willing to know what the last.
Only the one.
Only the one. This is a tiny little one, and that's planning permission to use any site for more than 28 days for using it for takeoff and landing. So let's say this warehouse is going to launch a drone. Well, they've got to get their planning permission in place. You're then going to have to go, right, well, we're going to deliver to this hub in the middle of a city. They're going to have to get planning permission to have the drone land there more than 28 days in a row or in a year. You can't just, UK planning rules will go 28 days.
But I believe that's why Richard is part of the discussions with Oxford County Council and the Oxford thing. Anyway, I'll just throw that in.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There are often many challenges, nothing to do with the actual operation of a flying to or remote service. And yes, planning is one of them. Coventry Council, Rugby Council, Reading and Oxford are all parts of the Coventry, Reading and Oxford are all parts of the consortium bidding to deliver Skyways. Because again, we can't solve every problem, right? But it isn't, again, it isn't up for us to solve every problem either. But what we can try and do is bring together all the parts and say, this is the desired outcome. What do we need to change in order to get to that stage? So, you know, our biggest wish for Skyway, of course, is that it turns into an operational service in the next couple of years and people can actually meaningfully use it and access it in exactly the way that we want. But actually, Skyway's secondary function is to highlight all of the bits that don't work or are going to need to change and to then accelerate that change. Today, everyone's just stuck, right? And everyone doesn't have really a mechanism to change that. It takes someone to come along and say, I'd like to build a railroad here, please, for someone to then talk about, oh, hang on, I think we should have a discussion around the planning element, for instance. We do or we don't want that. And, you know, the kind of discussions we're having with the councils, by the way, is have you ever thought about what it might mean to have an aerial mass transit system in your vicinity? And today you're really good at understanding and setting out planning rules for everything on the ground. But might you be concerned, for instance, with the approach and departure pathways of an urban airport in the middle of your city? Do you want to be able to say, no, you can't approach me from the west because there's a big residential development there or a wildlife reserve? And they have no real tools to even help them tackle that question today. So the default answer quite often is, no, we don't want any part of this because we have no way to quantify it, to tangibly interface with it, to change it. This gives them the opportunity to learn and to get comfortable. And I think it's when people get comfortable is when we can start to actually make the progress.
Now that vertiport in Coventry is busy being built, and that's with
Hyundai.
Oh, were you?
Yeah.
Why didn't you make a video? Walk around for us.
There's a launch coming. There's a launch coming.
I'm hoping to go to that launch. I've actually got to apply to go and see it and not take the mickey at all. They've designed something that can't take a helicopter. It's hilarious.
Well, Hyundai are big on that, I think. And one needs to watch them because when they start getting into stuff, and they've been very sensible with their timelines. That's one of the things I like about Hyundai. They're not saying it's going to be next week on Friday that we start operating and get everything. They've been very sensible. I
think it helps when you have more money than everyone in the world to be patient, right? And Hyundai are not short, I think to use an English phrase, are not short of a few bob. So if it takes them 10 years or 20 years, that's inconsequential. But you're right. I think they're very smart and they're approaching the market very differently from others. But that doesn't mean that they're right. It just means it's another approach and it's another smart one. So I think whoever obviously cracks the nuts, so to speak, initially, and then gets airborne is going to quickly be copied and followed by others.
Yeah.
And for those, I mean, we've had people commenting about where to find Richard. You'll find Richard on LinkedIn. And this isn't the first go at anything. Altitude Angel, the UTM has been around for quite a few, more than 5 years now. I don't know. Getting on for 10. I don't know.
We're nearly 7 years old now.
7 years old.
Nearly a decade old, almost dead.
Yeah. And but the number of have you got a number for just the number of flights in just say the UK that you handle per annum now, where people
notify? That's a new word. I like that one. I have to try and trademark that.
There you go.
I would have to. I haven't checked recently, but our averages are around sort of 100k flights per month on an average month. Is obviously very seasonal here in the UK, particularly as well, because we have really nonsense weather most of the time. So the other day we had, what was it, Storm Eunice? Not much flying occurring in those 48 hours, if I'm completely honest. But before and after, there was a lot of pent up activity. But yeah, this is just people very kindly sharing their flight information with us. So in exchange, we can share the flight information of others with them so that they can keep safe. But that was
where I was trying to take that was these towers aren't coming from zero data. They're not coming from. No. So you've got a good idea. Every month you'll have an idea of 100,000 cooperative, if we will, aircraft that you know about. So already if you're sorting the wheat from the chaff, there's a little bit of wheat to be sorted.
Yeah, there's like we say to folks, right? Aviation risk management is a bit like a patchwork quilt. We just aim to have more patches than anyone else, so that we can build a bigger quilt, right? And an ANSP.
You know John Denver song about that? It
I
sounds
don't
like
know.
a John Denver song, doesn't it?
Be a good set of lyrics. But joking aside, an ANSP can only see a very particular type of air traffic in a very particular set of conditions. So we tend to think of, if you're not in aviation, you think of air traffic control as the thing that sees everything in the sky, and it's just complete nonsense. We're trying to stitch all of that together, as well as create these areas of ultra high resolution. And then we have all the cooperative flight data from people. But remember, actually, a lot of that flight information that people pre-submit to us, or maybe if they're in a field, they actually genuinely at that point then submit it to us. It's still only an intent. There's still no direct link to the aircraft. It's effectively a plan. So that doesn't get, it gets factored in, but it's not what we would say is a highly weighted, as in WEIGHT, source of information when we're planning. But what we do obviously do is we do a strategic conflict analysis prior to takeoff to work out if we are aware of anyone that's told us they're likely to pop up in the middle of your flight. Then we'll obviously take steps to mitigate that prior to you actually executing that flight. But then everyone that actually cooperates with the Arrow service per se will have a telemetry link to the platform in real time. So I'll say real time, but the real time OS guys always get upset when I say that. But sub few seconds, they're refreshing their position information with our platform, which is very much more sufficient than an ANSP gets when they're waiting for the radar head to sweep around.
To swing around, yes, yeah, exactly. And so are you RID ready? There's another phrase for you, RID ready.
RID ready. The fabled remote ID that's here to solve everyone's problems.
That's right. That's why it's going to allow us to go BLOS. That's what all the Americans are telling us.
Well, I don't really know what to tell you, Gary. I think we've had.
They wouldn't lie. They wouldn't lie.
My views on this, but yes, remote ID tells me about a number that would be nice for us to broadcast. It tells me how to receive it and how to get them. Unfortunately, it builds in zero trust at all into the platform. So I also require.
Why does it build in zero trust? Just unpack that.
Nothing is cryptographically assured, and although I can receive the remote ID from another aircraft, I have no way to verify that it's actually been issued, actually genuine, and actually bound to the person. It's just like a crap version of ADSB again. The technical world.
So ADSB was crap to start with.
Excited about it. And yes, we
ADSB pre-crap.
Yes. But the reality is, this is having an identifier that we can all exchange doesn't equate to a navigation capability, right? It's just another source of electronic conspicuity. And I think, even here in the UK, there's all sorts of excitement, I believe, in the CAA about transponder mandatory zones, I think they're called, TMZs.
Yes.
Let's just mandate everyone to carry ADSB. Of course, that's the best thing to do, right? People above my pay grade make these decisions, but it doesn't seem to me to be a sensible one when any chump with a Raspberry Pi and an antenna can pretend to be any other aircraft in the sky.
He's calling you a chump, Bruce. He's calling you a chump.
Well, that's a step up from what most people call me.
Yeah.
But, the point is, right, if we're all told that we have to rely on a signal that is emitted from another aircraft, or maybe not an aircraft, but pretending to be an aircraft, and then we have no way to actually verify if that is at all reminiscent of the actual thing that's actually in the sky, then actually what we've just created is a bigger problem, because now everyone is legally bound to avoid those signals. So if anyone wants to shut down a skyway corridor, if we were solely reliant on the electronic conspicuity coming out of the RID crowd, then we would never fly, right? Because anyone would just pop a Raspberry Pi up. It is a meaningful step forwards in trying to consolidate the broadcast identity, but it has not solved trust. And that was the basic problem that the internet had initially, right? Everyone had the ability to put something onto the web, but no one had any idea to actually check or verify that what they thought they were getting and who they thought they were getting it from was actually correct. And the remote ID standard does exactly the same thing. Lastly, while I'm on my high horse, I fundamentally disagree with the requirement to identify the pilot's location. I do that for two reasons. One, privacy. I think that's a really important word that everyone seems to say, oh, if you've got nothing to hide, you can just get rid of privacy. To that I answer, if you've got curtains in your house, you care about your privacy.
Good answer.
Secondly,
You've got windows, you don't.
if you have windows, I don't know if that works. Secondly,
I use Linux.
Oh God. It's that time of night, isn't it, Bruce? It's that time of night.
Or morning.
But secondly, identifying the pilot is completely useless when there isn't one. And that, therefore, completely precludes the use of RID for an automated BVDOS operation. Where do I put the marker for the pilot? If the pilot is literally a cloud-based distributed system featuring 2,500 nodes spread across Europe.
You've thought ahead too far. They haven't thought of this. This is ADSB designed in the 90s, coming out in 2000.
But I think in the tech world, we can get away with thinking about something that lasts a few years because we're all prepared to change it in that time frame. But in the aviation world, what changes on a 2-year or a 3-year cycle? Most things are on a decade cycle minimum, right? Yeah. So all the decisions that we're making today, based on almost a decade now of talk, are still mandating solutions which at the time they were first conceived were already 2 decades old. So by the time we've regulated for it, it'll be 40 years old.
Yeah.
That's
ADSB, isn't it? 1992, wasn't it?
Well, this is the problem with all regulation. This is why all countries get stuck. Because the regulator, technology can come out tomorrow. Take an e-scooter, right? E-scooter, fantastic devices, but the regulations for them, no one can cope with it. Absolutely no one's got a Scooby-Doo in government. They've got no idea what to do. They run all these horrible tests saying, oh, we can hide this, that, and the other. They've just not got a Scooby-Doo. They can't, the governments just can't adapt and regulate quick enough for new tech.
I'll just put this one up for Richard's benefit. I'm very late to the party with this device, but there is your ADSB transmitter. That can produce ADSB out. So, there's your ADSB mitigator or your ADSB it's not safe device. It used to be not hard to do, but you used to have to get X-Plane 11 and all that sort of thing and pump it that way. That'll do it. That will spoof ADSB for it, and that's made Richard go. Look.
So here's an interesting thing then. So I heard this the other day. I won't say where from, but someone was asking about spraying drones in the UK to the CAA. So got a drone, wants to use it for spraying. CAA say no, not a cat and nails chance, basically, at the minute. And the reason, one of the things that came back was they'd asked someone in the security, cyber security stuff, how can you make sure no one's going to hack your drone, follow you? So they're going to follow your van. They found out who you are. They're going to follow your van. They're going to then hijack your drone through the network. They're just going to hack it, steal your drone, and then misuse it. So this came from their cybersecurity thing, and they were like, "Oh, how are you going to stop that from happening?" Well, if someone wanted a spraying drone that badly, you would just go, "Buy now, Foxtech, buy now, DJI, buy now, any other website you want, eBay, buy now." Why would they follow me to pinch my drone?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear us now, Richard? No, he can't hear me, but he can hear. I think he can hear you,
Richard,
Mark.
Are you there? Let's call him Richard.
No.
He's losing it again. Well, he's been losing it for a while, to be fair.
Yeah. I said log off and log in.
But that was really interesting about the Skyways. I mean, it's really good of Richard to come and explain so much about it.
And take so much abuse from us, as ever. He always takes abuse. You were very quiet, Bruce. I didn't know why you were so quiet.
My bandwidth's dropping out, so I've lost the last few minutes.
I mean, heaven forbid you have any sort of...
He didn't hear us talking about him. That's good.
Yeah. And that device, I don't know if you saw the device I put on screen, but that is your off-the-shelf ADSB spoofer now. That will transmit ADSB. 2,000 rand. Thank you very much.
Just as well, we're not building any new body of regulation, principally around the need to carry an ADSB transponder, then, right?
No, it's a good job we're not relying on that because
how much is 2,000 rand in real money?
I don't know. In dollars.
In dollars, 136 US dollars.
There you go. Easy, isn't it?
$136 to disrupt an aviation network. Not much, is it?
Yeah. No, it's good value, isn't it, really? And it does AIS, it does the shipping one as well.
What we're saying is I can chuck that in my believer and pump out ADSB.
Yeah, you could pump out a
and then I've got to avoid ADSB.
No, you couldn't, Mark, because it's illegal.
No. Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yes, the rules are going to stop me. That's right. Sorry. Yes, that's right. Because it's illegal, no one would.
That is an interesting one, right? Because again, controlled airspace is only controlled because it's illegal to go there without following some other rules. It doesn't mean, and Gary has a background in this, right? I'm sure he'll back me up. It doesn't mean that things that shouldn't be there don't go there on a regular and frequent basis.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, if I don't know if I've said it to you, but if you wanted to demonstrate the efficacy of your detection system, I would put a couple of towers on any of the corners of Heathrow's controlled airspace where people cut the corners relentlessly, like up by Denham, and just say to the controllers at Heathrow afterwards, well, how many tracks did you see? We saw this many. And that would be a very interesting test.
It's going to be fun. We have a little bit of cheeky news for you guys. We have an Arrow van that's been commissioned. And
does it sell ice cream? Was it just bloody radio stuff?
No ice cream. No fun in it. It's just drone technology. But it does have a coffee machine for the use of occupants of the vehicle.
In the summer, does it have a slushy machine? Because in the summer, you don't want the coffee. You want the slushy machines. Does it have that instead?
Sorry. Too power hungry. We can just about manage to make a coffee. But no, that's going to be useful for helping us obviously to site the towers and work out what sensor equipment we want and where. But actually, it does mean that we can rock up to all sorts of interesting locations and immediately stare into the sky and record what we see. And we do see a lot of interesting things when we play back all of our track data today. So I think all that Arrow is going to do is improve the resolution quite significantly. And probably raise some problems for some people because a lot of the things that they think are happening on a daily basis probably aren't. Or worse, the things that they think aren't probably are.
Well, yeah, and we just our rollout of purely ADSB receivers, lots of Raspberry Pi ADSB receivers here. We started seeing people flying in very, very naughty ways, very frequently, and we positioned some receivers near an airfield where ultralights fly, and we could see them routing low level through at 50 feet. Forgetting that it was just particularly the Sling aircraft comes with ADSB out as standard now down here. And they don't know you're watching, but we're watching going low level for a very, very long way. So I can see that having lots of sensors would be interesting. Now, I was just saying that Bruce, you've been very quiet. You obviously have no opinion on this.
Absolutely none. No.
Oh, all right then. It's interesting for you to be quiet on a subject.
It is interesting. Yeah, I'm just listening, taking it all in, waiting for the GitHub, repository of all the code.
Yeah, but it's basically we're not planning for that modern sky, are we? We're not.
No, we're years behind. It is kind of crazy, and it's such a huge weakness that we are. As Richard says, it's going to take 10 years before what we're doing has an effect. And by that time, the problem will have changed already again. So we're always going to be a generation or two behind the problem, which means the solutions will never be ideal.
I mean, when I first started out in the drone world, over 10 years ago now, I thought it'd all be automated. I thought I had 10 years in the business before everything would be automated. So we'd have to, right, I'm now going, no, it's another 30 years away. 40 years away. It's not going to be next year. It's not going to be the year after. All this stuff, as far as I can tell, is like 30 years away. I'm not going to worry about it anymore.
You read too many Price Waterhouse reports.
Yeah. Well, it's time to make a sensible system, isn't it? And we're supposed to argue with Richard, and we're supposed to lay into.
But the first thing they've got to do is just ADSB mandatory across the board for manned aviation. Don't mess around with only in class, not in class G or whatever. No, it just has to be mandatory across the board. All the stuff they're talking about making drones safer by remote ID, it pales into insignificance against the fact that there are too many instances where manned aircraft bang into each other for lack of ADS-B and TCAS. So, and it's a simple, proven technology that would save lives. That would make the air safer. Don't mess around with our toys.
I'm not
So
a
here's the
conspiracy
question.
theorist. Oh, sorry, I was going to say, Bruce, on that point, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, of course, as you know, but I imagine a lot of companies have done a lot of lobbying that make a lot of ADS-B transponding equipment and receiving equipment in order to get the attention of the
Particularly
regulator
receiving.
that it's presented as a viable solution. I mean, we all know that it is okay, it's reasonable, but it's not a solution to this particular problem. And actually, if you're going to mandate that every aircraft carries ADS-B rather than kind of optional for a lot of aircraft today, then it's not even very good at that either. So it's kind of awkward, isn't it, now that we've set the principal body of regulation in force that will make that happen.
So I've got a couple more questions I've just thought of. And silly me, I'm sorry. Can your system then takes in a DSB feed, I assume, right? Does it take FLARM in? Does it take Open Glider in? And then a couple of weeks ago or last week, there was a plane that went down in a city, hit a block of flats in the UK.
Oh, yeah,
I don't know if you saw that. So here's the question for you. Would your system, because it can track other things in the sky, so quite clearly you can track what's going on. So if you saw a plane going down, could your system then notify the emergency services and says, look, this has gone down, there's no airfield there, or we know where it's gone, it's here.
It would move the building.
I remember seeing the story, but I don't remember knowing if the aircraft that went down was carrying a transponder or not. So
no, regardless, because you can see, and you've said you can see everything in the sky.
So, well, the reality is, assuming, and I don't know where it went down, I can't remember, but assuming it was within the detection radii of one of our electro-optical sensors, for instance, then yes, we'd probably record it. But unless we projected that aircraft's trajectory was likely to conflict with the drone, we wouldn't have done anything about it. But what would be interesting is if the real authorities approached us and said, we're aware of an incident in that area, could we please see any footage that you might have recorded? We could probably go back and retrieve it. But again, that's different to what action would we have taken. I remember actually about 7 years ago, I walked into the office at NATS and I said, hello, I'm going to build a system that's going to have millions of drones in it, and we're going to have a real-time capability of all the things that are flying. If I had an imaginary cable in my hand, which system would I plug it into so that you can be aware of all that and keep everyone safe? And everyone just fell silent. I was like, we don't know what to do with this. That situation is still the same today. So even if we built a capability right now that could catch an aircraft in distress and report it to someone, we'd probably have to fax them or pick up the phone, right, in order to make that work. There would be no digital.
So you're not an anti-faxer then?
It's not laughable. It's probably how it would work. But the reality is, I mean, the Arrow network will have human supervisors anyway, remotely. So if they saw something, they would get in touch, right? But I mean, sadly, I just don't think there would be any backbone that we could plug into that we could advise people about. But I do expect we'll get requests for the data that we capture. But you guys know from previous shows that we've done that we get a lot of those a lot of the time, and we dismiss a lot of them unless they are valid and that they conform to a reasonable request and come with a warrant, or have come with a reasonable request of authority. And most of them don't, or they're just so overly broad that it's phishing. So we protect people's privacy in that way.
360 Radar, the ADS-B receiving group in the UK, get an awful lot of requests from the AAIB, an awful lot. He keeps the data for that reason. At the end of the day, though, you're pushing against a very solidly locked door with AT&S operators around the world with their various baked-in radar providers, baked-in ADS-B providers. You're asking them to change a system that's been around for 50 years, aren't you, really?
Which should be enough, right, to make people go, oh, my goodness, it's been around for 50 years. Maybe there's something new that could improve the situation. But actually, the default is it's been around for 50 years. No one's died yet. It's clearly the right solution for another 50 years. And
Yes.
the sad reality is that truth doesn't even hold true, because many people have died in aviation still. And maybe if there was slightly more modern technology or operating procedures.
Well, I heard they're replacing the valves with transistors in those ADS-B things now.
I think we're on the route to that. I think there's a plan for it, Bruce. I don't think it's happened yet. But some modern air traffic control facilities are mystified by the advent of voice over IP and still use analog radio switching, and trying to get the business case for using a digital voice over IP system is just insanely difficult to do, despite the fact it improves safety in operations. It's like you're trying to introduce the concept of fire to a pre-modern place that's never seen it before.
Come here, Mr. Watson, my router needs rebooting.
Yes.
Here's the question then, Richard. So here's the question then, Richard. Is it not only has the system been around for 50 years that we've had for 50 years, but the people that came up with that system still exist and they're still
most of them are dead.
Yes. Well,
I don't know.
Mid-air collisions.
I imagine
they've been there 30 years, 20 years. They're stuck in that system. They only think of that way. Do you know what I mean? People get stuck in that rut, and they just need that nudge to think a bit more out of their comfort zone and their box.
There was just before I got cut off earlier, I was looking at the definition of regulator. And remember, a regulator is also a component in a semi-autonomous system designed to keep everything exactly the same, regardless of external change. And I'm just minded by that secondary definition, right? It's kind of what regulators do in aviation. Of course, the excuse we're all given is that because that keeps everyone safe.
Safety.
But that assumes that nothing else in the environment has ever changed. And of course, decades have passed and things have changed. But what hasn't changed or caught up is the tolerance for testing new technologies, or even the capability to test them, if it could improve the safety outcome. Mitchell has said a really good thing in the chat there. Isn't human error still the leading cause of incident? Yes. But that raises a question, doesn't it, Mitchell? Why in 2022 is human error still the predominant cause of air incidents? This isn't a technology problem anymore. It's a policy one.
It's like self-driving cars. They want them to be better than a human. They expect them to be 100% perfect. Not as good as a human, because a human, we're flawed. You know, we make terrible judgment calls all the time, especially when driving. We're horrendous. But that car has to be perfect. Not 99%, not 80%. You know, it has to be perfect. And
I agree with you, Mark, but I think the worst thing is those conversations quickly then go beyond perfection into the realm where no human could ever make the right decision. So, for instance, in an autonomous vehicle, the autonomous vehicle is in a no-win situation. No matter what it does, it's evaluated a trillion different possible outcomes. It's either going to crash and kill a baby or crash and kill an old man. Which one does it make the decision to kill? Right now, in reality, you or I would never even be able to have that conversation, right? The sad fact is someone's going to die and there isn't going to be a conscious decision, but we're going to get stuck enabling this technology from occurring until we can define what that system should do. So somewhere, someone, probably an insurance actuary, will decide which person's going to contribute more to society over time and have the autonomous system kill the person with least value. That's the worry, right?
That's you and me, Bruce. We're out.
So that gets even more
Richard has
disturbing.
voted.
So that's even more disturbing, because then it has to do a check to see which one is more valuable.
Well, that's like an
AI. It'll just keep killing people, and it'll just then favour the one that gets the least complaints.
What was that killer car film where the car goes around killing everything? What was that?
Christine.
Richard's too young to know. He's too young. He doesn't know what we're talking about.
Stephen King, wasn't it?
Is it one of those black and white movies you guys have told me
that's
about?
it. That's right. We went to the bioscope and watched it. Yeah.
He doesn't even realise that it's nothing to do with film. The world was actually black and white when we were young, wasn't it, Gary?
It was black and white. We had to go around painting an awful lot of stuff.
Or think of Knight Rider, but think of the evil version, Car, because where he only thought of himself and he didn't care about anything else.
Okay.
Kids today.
That Gary's, Mark's point was key there, right? Because the safety bar held up for these systems is often not just better than the equivalent human, but better than the equivalent superhuman that doesn't exist, right? And I just don't understand that logic, because clearly that was never a problem when we invented the first aeroplane, right? Or we built the first automobile, or the first car. The generation of people did all of that. I wish they were still here today, right? Because those people went, that sounds good. Let's try that. Let's try and make it reasonably safe, as opposed to let's try and enumerate all the possible edge cases that could be reasons why we shouldn't do anything for another 10 years.
Yeah. Well, till I'm retired, got my big fat pension, or have off-ramped onto some other sort of a company.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of lifers in various different organisations, right? They're probably on final salary pensions. It's just a bit too much bother to worry about this problem now, because by the time I've done it, I'll be in the Bahamas. It's that kind of thing. And that's the reality. We need to fix that.
We do.
But that takes political pressure, right? And again, that's part of the proposal behind Skyway, is to try and attract a bit of political pressure into an area which probably doesn't want much, because it's suddenly going to come up against a bunch of ministers in this country that are going to say, why can't we do this? Why has it taken you a decade and you've done nothing? That would be an interesting one.
You've picked an area, particularly the bottom part through Berkshire and Oxfordshire, that is particularly NIMBY based. So if you want to have a tough area of the UK to crack from that sort of point of view, I mean, up north it doesn't matter, and off to the east,
who
cares? But
I'm not going to subscribe to that. I've been up north, it's scary. But the reality is actually places like Coventry are fairly wayfaring in compared to London and to Berkshire and the other areas. The tolerance for trying new things and the appetite to get on board and experiment, although the funding is often quite not there, is just starkly different. So it's really important that we enable everybody along that route to at least have an opportunity, and then to shine a light on those folks that kind of overlook it because it's a bit too difficult, or I'm not quite sure, I probably need another 10 years to, I don't know, get up and walk out and have a look and see it.
Sean
we can do better, right? As a country, as a world, we can do better than just keeping everything the same.
No, we can't.
Sean made a good point about sifting out nonsense so realistic strategies can be followed. That's unfortunately is the entire drone business.
Well, there's so much nonsense, isn't there? We were thinking, I've got two questions. First, I just want to come back on the strategy piece and just say to Sean, I absolutely agree. Do you guys know why we called Arrow Arrow?
Because it was sharp at one end?
No, it's because it's a strategy, right? Arrow is called Arrow because principally the primary method of navigation in the early days of aviation wasn't aviation charts and radar. It was giant concrete arrows.
Arrows on the ground.
Now, the point being, it's a message, right? And the message we're sending is that's how we used to do things, and we don't use them anymore because there are better things, and you all agree that they're better. Now, one day you won't need our arrow towers, but the problem is we're not even trying at the moment. We're just sticking around with the things that originally replaced the concrete arrows 75 to 80 years ago. So that was the reason we built Arrow, because it is a strategy to go from where we are now, which is stuck, to the very next step, rather than to what lots of drone companies will sell, which is a bit snake oil. It's kind of billions of autonomous vehicles flying around, all happily living in harmony. There's such a delta between where we are and where we need to get to. We want Arrow to be a viable step to then get people moving, but then to test those strategies, Sean. So I think, absolutely hit the nail on the head with that one. Absolutely.
Very good.
And with that violence.
Yeah, I know I should have come a very good way to cut away from that. Well, let's just, without being too rude to Richard, because you've been super generous with your time.
Why can't we be rude to Richard?
Yeah,
why is this week any different?
I can't.
Yeah, but okay, true. Yes, of course.
When did you develop a heart, Gary?
Sorry.
Can't be cruel to Richard. I feel like now it'd be like kicking the little puppy because it's just recovering from COVID and everything else.
Yeah.
Can't kick him when he's down.
Weak as normal now, so you can
he's weak. Get him now while he's weak. Yes.
That was the question I was going to ask you guys. I've just remembered COVID has obviously mashed my brain. there are all of these great awards in the world for drone companies. Right? Many of them are self-serving, and there are all of these fantastic press releases that everyone does, and we're debating. And it's probably just a pub conversation right now, but I mean, we're just friends here, right? There's only 4 of us on the call.
Yeah, exactly.
We're debating whether we do the opposite and we do the bullshit awards effectively.
Yes. Oh yeah.
And we just because actually you mention that.
So many entries.
We'd make a mint on YouTube because it would go on forever. But I think the thing we're pointing out is we're in a lot of consortia with a lot of the companies that
a lot of the bullshit
crap. So we know the reality, and we're just debating. Legally, if there's an NDA, we've got to be careful. But if someone puts something in the public domain, why can't other people kind of just comment on it and just say, "I'm sorry, what did you just do?"
Well,
that?
I mentioned this. I don't know about 6 months ago. I said on this very channel, I said we needed to do something similar to that, and somehow engage our audiences here, which are people that really know their stuff.
Both of them.
But all 2 of them, yes, and the dog, especially the dog. And I just didn't quite know how to phrase it, but yeah, not quite. I don't think we could say bullshit awards, but most likely not to succeed. Right? No, but most likely, I was thinking most likely not to succeed, or what are something like what are the chances of this?
That's the sad part, because actually it does sometimes seem that those people who can weave the best story do start to win because they convince all the people that don't understand. Well, I know there are other companies that begin with A that are also guilty of this, but I think Out of Danger wasn't one of them, by the way, just to call that out.
Yeah,
just going to say, realize that backfired very quickly.
The hyperbole.
Generally speaking, I do worry because a lot of the time people just publish what they receive, and a lot of influential people read those things, like ministers. They read them and they're like, "Oh, I like that. That's a thing. Let's do that thing. Here's £10 billion. Go and do that thing." But no one's actually doing the critical analysis of it and just saying, "I'm sorry, that's just utter crap." Not only is that not going to happen, you also haven't done those things, and here's the proof. And I just think aviation is such a reputation-driven industry. I don't quite understand why some of these people haven't yet been weeded out. So we fought a lot to keep our reputation by delivering.
It hasn't worked. Yeah.
Send me the script and I'll do it. Send me the script and I'll do it. I don't care. I
categories.
In the chat, the Vapor Awards.
Hyperbole Awards. Best 3D rendering.
Vapor Trail. But I think there's something in this. I mean, I'm sure at the moment, if anyone in my company is watching, they're currently figuring out how they can disconnect me from the internet permanently so that I don't actually get to do this.
Least likely to succeed. All those things. So many trophies.
But I've got one from the CAA.
But you could expand it, right? By the way, you wouldn't have to just limit it to drone companies. You could also call out regulatory bodies like the CAAs and the NAAs of the world, the departments of transports, and the people in the ANSPs that are just career building.
And we're all used to having no friends anyway, so we've got nothing to lose.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah, but you get called out on it, and so I was going to sort of move from Richard to Richard, our other friend Richard, the barrister, and another Ian. Have been going into Aintree. I can't say too much because that's coming, but that would fit your regulatory, your regulator negative award for what's happening at Aintree. I won't say much more than that, but in a couple of weeks' time, we will definitely have a special episode about that and airspace changes. And this sort of thing has the potential to come into this Richard's world if some dodgy airspace changes happen, and then he has to promulgate it through his system and all that. Well, is it equitable and fair? And if a company, if I don't fly based on information that Richard provides me, because that's what he's been told to provide, and it's shown to be incorrect or wrong, then where's the blame? It should end with the air traffic provider, I suppose. But there'll be a chain to follow there as well. I'm waffling around this because I can't say what's happening.
But those that are using Elon Musk's new Twitter will know what it's all about.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
There's an interesting point there, by the way, because the regulated provision and dissemination of aeronautical information is to a person, right? So quite often a state has no warranty that they provide to a company like Altitude Angel when we acquire it. So the very information that you can be prosecuted for if you're violating a particular block of airspace isn't going to come with a commercial guarantee of accuracy to any company that wants it, which is a bit rich, don't you think? Because if we go to the FAA, for instance, say we'd like all of the data, they'll give it to us, but it comes with a disclaimer saying we're not going to warrant the accuracy of this to you. Sorry, what?
So then how can anyone ever be prosecuted? But how can anyone ever be prosecuted for an airspace incursion then?
Yeah. Well, I think it's how they discharge that information and principally who they're giving it to. So disseminating it to an individual is part of the regulated license mandate, and they do that visually and graphically. Although they're using systems now, obviously, to help disseminate that, it doesn't seem to extend to anyone that digitally wants to acquire that information. So, for instance, if you go onto the NATS website, the AIPs, you'll see restrictions against screen scraping, because obviously you could come along and pick it up in that way. The reality is what most people do is they completely avoid NATS and they go to Eurocontrol and download it from there, which NATS legally have to provide to Eurocontrol anyway. So you go and get it from someone who has thought about it rather than someone who hasn't. So this is the reality of the world that we live in. The most basic information being produced by a state, often under license to a regulated entity, doesn't come with a commercial warranty. So it's nice saying, oh, we must have a UTM company that's regulated and it must conform to this standard and that standard. But if the basic computer science principle is garbage in, garbage out. So if you're not going to stand by the very data you give me for the maps, why the hell are we bothering with this other nonsense? Let's get that correct first.
Yeah, we should have the other Richard here, because I'm sure there must be an implied warranty. You can't sidestep your obligations. You can make a disclaimer, but it may not hold up in court.
Perhaps. But again, is the Altitude Angel going to sue the US federal government? Probably not.
Go for it, mate. Go for it. I'll chip in.
You've got a missile, though, Gary. Yeah. We can use that to deliver a leaflet.
You're saying
deliver a leaflet.
So you're saying this information right here, basically, is not
it could have been. That could have been where you spilt your jam sandwich, man.
What I'm saying to you is, one of the nice things we do for all of our recreational users and all of our commercial users is we introduce a warranty which says that we won't introduce any inaccuracy in the information that we receive or we pass on, right? But which is actually a lot nicer than we get from many of the states in which we acquire that data in the first place, because people need to rely on it. And then what we have done, and actually, Gary, I think you probably reported some issues before, but many users have written to us and expressed dissatisfaction with the information that we're giving them. And then we collect all of that. And, we used to forward it to NATS, for instance, in the UK, and we just gave up very recently because they just stopped effecting any change. And sometimes it would take 90 days to get something like an FRZ corrected. So in the end, we just said, okay, sorry, this is what we're responsible for. We'll go check to see if we introduced an error. Oh, no, we didn't introduce an error. So actually, this is a problem with the source. And I just think it's terrible that the organizations that are hoping to become the heart of UTM going forwards just can't get the basics correct. And that's the question, right? Is it legally enforceable if a UTM company is giving you a map? Probably not. But if you should have got it from NATS or from another ANSP, then yes, probably you didn't get your responsibility under the ANO correctly because you didn't go to the original source.
So here's the question then, Richard. Do you go to the CAA then and go, look, NATS aren't doing their job right. They need to go.
I can confirm that we have on a number of occasions, most recently earlier this year, reported at least one discrepancy of a FRZ, which is a flight restriction zone. It's quite an important thing that was misrepresented by our great ANSP. Not a lot happened. We obviously reported it to the ANSP and then eventually fixed it. But again, it frustrates me because if we make a mistake, virtually it's reported within seconds from someone in our community. And if we've introduced the error, which we don't, I don't actually, in 7.5 years nearly, I don't think we've ever introduced an error. but we've had a few instances where people have said, oh, it'd be really good if you could just refresh your ground data, because actually this housing estate is now finished and I'd like to see it on the map. So we get that quite a bit, but people are on us immediately if there's a problem or a suspected problem. We just have no digital mechanism to send it back to the people who publish the maps, because of this wonderful thing called the AIRAC cycle, firstly, which says it's okay to be at least a month out of date.
Yes. Well, this could be 12 months out of date. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, surely, if I was to make a mistake, the CA would jump up and down on me, right, really well.
Yeah,
right?
because the principal body of regulation makes you liable.
Yeah, so I'm liable, but what the...
I'm looking on this real chart to see if there's a disclaimer. There's no form of disclaimer at all.
Right.
Validity of aeronautical information.
So, for instance, we can't digitize that chart, right? Because again,
yes, I know it says that on here. I can read that on here. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
So again, when it comes to electronically picking up this information and disseminating it, the reality is the vast majority of states in the world don't have commercial warranties in place to verify the efficacy of that data. And the excuse that's often given is because obviously nobody could have a system that is greater than or at least equal to the capability of the immense ATM system, and therefore anyone else would be introducing liability for the publisher. Absolute nonsense. Just sign it with a digital signature and then get us to verify it. And if the signature is different, we've screwed up. But the reality is they don't want to do it, because that is the crown jewels for a lot of these companies, right? The maps are important. So they're discharging their legal responsibility to provide it to pilots, but to companies that want to consume it for anything other than that, that's it. At least, all I will say is, at least we've got Eurocontrol, right? At least they recognise the need for companies to access it. It's still very convoluted how you do it, and still involves a lot of old technologies that really should have been killed many years ago for security reasons. But the reality is it can be done, but it's generally not by the publisher themselves. It's done by an aggregator that people publish into by law.
That's atrocious.
That is absolutely atrocious. But in our world, from the drone world, let's say it's our world, from the drone world, we should just strive for a better standard, a higher standard, and do it better, and do it with a view to 50 and 100 years' time, not to 10 years' worth of waiting around. It says in here, users are requested to refer corrections and any comments on the portrayal of topographical and aeronautical information to blah, 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 blah. So it says it's how to do it here if there's any mistakes. And there will be some nuggets, like they put false streets on maps, don't they? The Ordnance Survey to so if you have photocopied the map or just copied it by hand, they can work out that you've picked up the false streets. So there will be errors on here to stop copying. I can't remember what they call them, gate errors or something like that.
I think paper towns.
Ghost. Yeah,
a gate error is something completely different.
The very first maps, cartographers would introduce fictitious towns that didn't exist.
Yes.
Easy.
Yes.
I will tell you actually that you will find in our data feeds invisible zones that won't render on a map, but are digital signatures that we rotate on a regular basis, so we can work out who's copying our data, and it turns up with a disturbing frequency from competitors. It turns up from partners in some instances where they're using stuff where they shouldn't be. So it's quite, again, this is why I'd quite like to do the Vapor Awards and just say, oh, come on, really, let's just all be sensible.
Well then, all right, well, let's start it here and now then. Who's our current number one for that award?
I think I would probably do the human equivalent of the blue screen of death if you actually maybe try and pick one. There's quite a lot of people in the Altitude Angel sin bin at the moment. But to be high on that list, you've either got to be obviously spouting utter crap into the world. I think that's like criteria number one. And then press releasing it, right? So at least, Mark, you don't release a press release for all of the nonsense that you're telling us that you spout. I don't think you do, but reality is these companies do. Or you've got to be just in a position of some control or authority or a regulatory body or a regulated body, and just pretending, right? You're just, oh yeah, we're amazing. We're inventing all the UTM things. It's all going to be amazing. Please, can we have some more funding? Thank you very much. I'd like to build an even bigger team now. I need 40 people to do absolutely nothing rather than 20 people to do absolutely nothing. That kind of stuff would go very high up the list, because I do think there are a lot of public bodies acquiring a lot of public funding and just wasting it. And now more than ever, particularly
our
here
regulator,
in the UK, we can't deal with this. We don't need this. Wastage is not good.
I
right
think
now.
No, it's not.
I think
You're right, Richard. You know,
there should be a bullying category.
Hmm.
And in the bullying category, it will be overseas companies pushing their way into other companies' development plans or projects or whatever you want to call, or why the hell are you there? So that would be a bullying award we could have.
Yeah, the bullying awards. I think we should have the borderline corruption awards or questionable
borderline corruption.
So, oh, hang on, you used to work for someone maybe some sort of regulator, and then you went to work for a private company building the things that the regulator.
That's the golden. The goal surely
and made it law. Like,
but that's going to be called the golden off ramp, hasn't it? That's the golden off ramp. The golden off-ramp,
parachute.
Yeah. Golden parachute.
We need to do some research on the, what is it, defamation? Yeah, we might need to research that just in case.
Defamation.
Sean in the chat, by the way, is on an absolute roll here, because he's just speaking utter sense. We could introduce a working standard. If your project doesn't prove X, then it isn't seen as serious. How about if your project doesn't actually do what you said it was going to do or did, then it just goes in the sin bin immediately. Because that gets rid of what, 95% of all the press releases?
Cripple the entire tech industry.
No,
they're special. You have to leave the tech industry out.
What about unmanned aerial mobility vehicles that are using certain hardware and software that shouldn't be used for manned aviation?
Well, EHang are currently out for people's blood, so we daren't mention EHang using a Pixel.
I'd never mention that.
And I'd never say that there's Mavic there are Mavic messages exclusive to ArduPilot in their videos that they've just removed from the internet.
That's what you call coincidence, Gary.
It is coincidence. You're
absolutely complete coincidence.
Right. I would never mention that. I would never even think about talking about that, because I could end up in trouble and have people from the company following me all of a sudden on Twitter for no good reason, as happened to Ian, myself, and who else they followed? They followed a load of us.
Not me.
Yeah, but you know, obviously it's all better now. But what about just having a single working device that, if it's a small drone that actually flies, it does what it says, instead of multiple press releases, loads of renders, and having never that got rid of Bruce. Yeah, I mean, it is nuts. It is nuts what's out there. He's gonna come back. What did I say?
Who knows?
Exactly.
Example. Sorry, just going back to the data. I've just thought I'd just check that I'm still correct here, and I've just gone on the NATS website, and there's a disclaimer under the UAS airspace restrictions digital data set that says at the bottom, this map presents keyhole markup language, KML, which is an XML language focused on geographic visualization and contains no circle geometry. Therefore, to create airspace very close to circles, we've had to use, I'm going to paraphrase, approximations of a circle. Utter crap. Yes, you could have changed that, right, and introduced the circle to geometry, which is what we did at Altitude and any other sensible person in the universe has done. But no, we've done the bare minimum we could possibly do to get away with it. But again, that means, right, if you play that out at scale, if you take one of those polygon approximations of a circle, you actually then misrepresent the actual restriction by a significant amount. We're talking, in some instances, potentially thousands of square meters. It's just shocking. And I don't understand how people get away with that, given that that's an official data set. You've paid for that, right? If you live in the UK, you paid for that.
No. They can get away with it because they put that little comment at the bottom. That's how they get away with it, Richard. They put that little comment at the bottom.
The worst part is actually, it's not even just that. It's actually, they're trying to get away with it by saying, due to this limitation, when you visually zoom in, there can appear to be small gaps. It's like, well, what if I don't want to look at it visually? What if I want to use it digitally? And given it's called a digital data set, it might be conceivable that a machine might try and process it and interpret what's actually supplied rather than what I meant to infer, and somehow to chamfer the edges of the polygon with my eyeballs to then work it out. It's
You
just
guys are too
insane.
focused on the details. Just go with the vibe. It's the vibe. That's the important thing.
It's the feel of the map. It's the feel of the data set. It's,
I believe that's what you call
know,
the spirit of the regulation rather than the
spirit.
moral.
I
didn't
am
mean
having
that.
spirit tonight.
What I like is Richard's ranting about gnats.
But I'm ranting about everyone, not exclusively Nats. There are
Well,
other
COVID is a terrible thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's COVID, isn't it? That's what's done it to you, Richard. It's COVID.
I think
Richard,
there are a lot of things that need to change to get this industry moving in the direction we all know it can and should. And enough's enough now. It's been nearly, for some people, they've been talking about it a decade, and still bugger all has happened. That's an indictment of all of their performance, don't you think? Like, if that's been your job for 10 years,
he's having a go at us again, Bruce. He's having a
Yeah,
go.
but they all crow about leading the world. Eh? All these regulators are leading the world and we're supporting innovation. And it's still
what's
rubbish.
interesting is, I think, if you performed like that in the private sector, you probably still wouldn't have a job, would you? That's a big question.
Or you'd be running a monopoly or duopoly.
Well, at least if you've got a monopoly, you haven't got to change.
But Richard,
No, we just don't go to jail.
You missed it. YASA, and they brought out all the new drone regulations. They solved all your problems. These problems don't exist that you're talking about. All these new regulations were meant to solve all that. You know, forward thinking and all that.
It's going to be great when we can. I mean, I presume you're talking about all the CIS regulations that have been promoted and announced, and that's great. We've actually go to YASA and say, "Hello, I'd like to complete the certification process, please." They'll tell you, "I don't think we've finished it yet." And you say, "Well, how much is it going to cost?" And they'll look at you and they'll go, "Money." And they don't know, but they don't know how to walk through it. And once you've done it, you still haven't thought through all of the problems and all the eventualities that are actually going to stop you doing anything. So. Great. The state's going to have a CIS. Fantastic.
It's great, isn't it? We'll come up with these fantastic ideas and then go, we don't know how to do that, actually. We've got no idea. We need some money to do it.
The research money. There are companies that exist in the UTM space that exist solely off research funding.
And that's disgusting.
And they talk about it like it's a production system, but actually they've pulled in these companies, typically not based in Europe. They're based abroad. They'll spin up a local company. They're therefore a startup in the local territory. They're exempt from a lot of the different checks that older companies like AA would have to go through. Not big companies, but just older companies. They'll swoop in 2 or 3 million pounds or 4 or 5 million euros, complete a bit of a thing, do a press release about it, and now they've got a solution. And then they go on to the next program and the next program.
And then maybe have an office above a chip shop in Cranfield. Perhaps.
Who knows?
You might do that. You could do that.
Who knows?
Or is it a news agent?
I'm going to start a drone company and call it Theranos.
Exactly. Well, that's what I was speaking to earlier, a little bit about companies swooping in and solving the problems from other countries and taking research money. It's not on. They shouldn't. They should be better vetted. Rather give money to if you're in America, an American company. If you're in the UK, a UK company that eventually fails. But rather your own country's company has that research money.
Or just a legitimate interest, someone who can legitimately move the bar. You know, I would even go so far as probably be so left wing and say, let's remove the geographic restrictions. Let's just make it a sensible restriction that you've got to have a bona fide interest in.
You've got to have a good. Yes, true. Yes, you've got to have a good idea. Yes, true.
Yeah.
I'm the mean one where I would go, you're not a UK company getting squat out of me. You know what I mean? Outage Angel, though, you're a UK company. Here's some money. Keep doing your development.
You don't see that in the UK. I mean, I think it happens a lot in the US, for instance. Show me the stars and the stripes, and if you haven't got those, then kind of jog on, mate. But if you come to the UK, it's very difficult actually to get someone like the CAA to back a UK company. CAA seems to have no problem actually backing US companies, particularly when it comes to the area of ADSB and things like that. But generally speaking, trying to get the UK to support its own grassroots innovation, which, by the way, if you look at the local TV lately, will all be about the quality of our innovation and our entrepreneurs on a national scale. It's quite damning that we don't really do a lot to support grassroots innovation in the country. So just that's my little secondary moan now about being a founder in the UK. It's just we don't really support and nurture other founders. It's quite terrible here, really.
And not only is it terrible, but what also tends to happen, and you've not done it yet, so I tip my hat, is as soon as someone does start to get going, they just sell it off to a foreign company. You know, I mean, it's gone to another foreign company. It's like it's just, oh yeah, come on, we can do this.
I've often been asked, like, what's your plans for AI? It's like, oh, you know, everyone thinks that you just want to sell it to the highest bidder as quickly as possible. It'd be lovely to sell it to the highest bidder as quickly as possible, but the reality is, don't think we trust the highest bidder at the moment. Firstly, secondly, if I wanted to make a quick buck, then there are probably a lot easier ways to do it than here, and actually have to come onto this podcast, video cast on a regular basis. Like, I'd have just gone and built like a social media app or something, and that would be amazing, wouldn't it?
So what is the highest bid for Altitude Angel? May as well ask him. You know,
£5.50.
What are you on? How much have you got behind that sofa, Mark?
Well, hang on a minute. I've got some coins. I can do
few more coins. That's all I'm
41p. 41p. I've got 41p here right now.
Chuck in a packet of love hearts and half a curly whirly, and we might be.
Oh no!
You take crypto.
You're not getting that curly whirly. No way. The love hearts, I split them.
You're not getting a board.
This is a powerhouse of industry discussion, isn't it?
It is really, isn't it? Right down to the last curly whirly.
Yeah.
It's all there. All the data's there. Look, I think we've been going 2 hours and 15 seconds. So I'm going to say thank you, gentlemen. I'm going to try and end it at 2 hours. Look after yourselves wherever you are in the world. Take care. We'll see you again next week. Richard, thank you very much. Cheers, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.